Hey, what's going on? My name's Vit, and in this video we're going to be talking about my HUD. I've actually got a lot of requests about this. My HUD is specifically designed for combat, so if you're a more casual player, if you're into, the social side of this game, maybe yours will look a little differently than mine, but mine's really set up to just be as clean as possible without any visual clutter anywhere. So there's also a few things that I want to talk about that are really important to keep in mind when setting up your HUD for combat. And we'll get into those in a sec, but there's two things I want to mention real quick before we get started. One is that I obviously play on controller. You'll see my hotbar has the cross hotbar layout. If you're on mouse and keyboard, all this stuff is going to apply to you as well. For the purpose of this video, just ignore that I'm on controller. It's literally, there's nothing controller specific. If anything, if you're on mouse and keyboard, maybe you'll have some extra hotbars around with some stuff to click on. Because on controller, you do have the ability to cycle through 8 different hotbars. So I have a lot of, extraneous stuff like all of my jobs that I can switch to and, just some random emotes and stuff, all on these hotbars in the same spot, which keeps it nice and clean. So if you're on mouse and keyboard, maybe you have those elsewhere in some of those fancy collapsible hotbars. I'm not sure how to set those up myself. I've never needed to, being on controller. But yeah, I don't know. That's the only real difference. And then the other thing is that I also play on PC on an ultra-wide monitor. As you can see, in my videos, I keep it in the standard aspect ratio just so it's, you don't get those black bars on the top and bottom that you're seeing now. But you'll notice that I do have some stuff crammed into the corners of the ultra-wide. There's not much on the left-hand side. The only thing is some main story quest stuff and my alliance raid party lists. I also have chat down in the bottom left underneath my camera right now. Here, I'll just even turn off my camera so you can see my chat is down there. Pretty standard stuff. There's nothing really fancy about the chat. I do have an extra window set up for FC and party chat just to take out some of the clutter. But outside of that, there's nothing fancy about chat. I'm going to bring the camera back for now just so you can see my face, I guess. But while we talk about this. But right now, I'll leave it in this ultra wide so you can see as we get into some of this stuff, what it really looks like on my end. If you're on a standard 16:9 monitor, just know that some of this stuff on the sides will be pushed in a little bit. It shouldn't make any difference. For me, I just have a little more peripheral vision with this monitor, but there's plenty of room for these things on the sides to just be squeezed in a little bit. It really should make no difference, but yeah, we'll jump into all the other stuff. There are some important things to talk about, and we'll get right to it. Okay, so let's just talk about some of the basic stuff that's on the screen. I'll leave it in ultra wide right now so you can see a little better. Obviously, I've got my hotbar at the bottom. I've got my HP and mana below that. I typically don't look at these too much. I'm usually looking up at the party list if I need to check HPs. So this kind of just sits here, but it's in a good spot if I do need to check it, just in case if I'm doing my rotation, looking at my hotbars for different things. It's right there. I keep my level or my EXP bar at the very bottom, nice and small, just big enough that I can actually see the lettering on it. It's just barely big enough for that, but it's down there. And then you'll see up here, I have my chocobo out so you can at least see the party list. Normally this would obviously be 4 or 8 people. So you'll just have to use your imagination. That would be slightly longer with more, more party members. But right now, it's kind of like up here in the top left. If you're a healer main, you may want to bring your party list a little closer to center, just so it's closer to your field of vision. I play DPS most of the time, so I'm not doing too much in the party list that I need to be staring at it and taking my eyes away from the center of the screen very often. But just be aware that if you're playing tank or healer, specifically healer, you may just want that a little closer to center, maybe in this area. Just because in general, you want to be looking at the center of the screen and just quickly glancing at other stuff. A lot of people seem to struggle with staring at their hotbar as well. So you could even bring that up a little bit, but that gets a little tricky. One thing with the hotbar that I'll mention is that I like to make sure that it's low enough and small enough that it's not obstructing my feet at all. So obviously you want a clear field of view to whether or not you're standing in AoEs, or, you know, you need to see where you're standing in this game very clearly. So there's also the ability to angle your camera up and down. So I'm pretty sure the standard view is like dead center where your character's in the middle. One thing that I like to do is personally angle it up so that I can just see more ahead of me. If like I have my camera angled down like this, I can see more of what's in front of me, whichever direction I'm looking. Because usually, you know, you don't need to be spinning your camera around. You don't really need to see what's behind you too often. So angling your camera up like that lets you see more of what's in front of you more easily. Again, this might just be a comfort thing. For me, I like having my character just slightly above my hotbars down here, kind of on the bottom third of the screen. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe for you, you like being dead center. I would never have yourself in the upper third or anything like that, but yeah, I don't know. Play with this. It's control up and down on the keyboard, or I believe there's a setting somewhere in the character configuration as well that I'm not going to try to find it right now, but there is a slider as well in the menu that you can adjust that field of view. But yeah, let's just jump into the actual HUD layout and show you where some stuff is. So this is going to look really busy. Let me turn off my camera again real quick. I'm going to be swapping the camera on and off and swapping back and forth between ultra wide and standard as well. So let me just go over what's in the ultra wide field of view so you can see. We'll get that out of the way and then we'll move into the standard field of view. But for me, again, MSQ in the top left, this only shows up when you have an active MSQ quest. Once you're done with MSQ, it kind of disappears. I have my alliance party lists, which realistically could come down here under my standard party list, and that would be plenty comfy as well. So if you're on like a standard field of view, that's probably where I would put them. But for me, on ultra wide, they kind of just live up there. You don't really need to look at those very often in alliance raids unless you're a healer and have to like heal the other party's healers or res them. If the other parties die, you might need to, you know, get over to them. Side note, if you're on controller, you can hold left bumper and do left and right on the D-pad, or up and down, one of the two. I think it's left and right with LB or L1, and it'll cycle through those party members. Again, I just have my chat in the bottom left. And then for the right side, it's just server info, minimap, status, other. So we'll get to that in a sec, but that's just like my FC buffs. And then my duty list, which, you know, shows your active quests and your active instance. If you're in one, it'll show like the instance timer and everything. And then main menu, guild, and inventory in the bottom right. That's really stuff that's just there for convenience if I ever need to click on it. But yeah, let me just go back to standard 16:9 view here. Let me turn my camera off here again, just so you can get a good view. So for you might bring, you know, the mini-map in, your duty list and everything. Maybe you have that up in this top right corner, kind of like I do, but there's plenty of room for it to be pushed in. You can ignore a lot of this. It looks really cluttered right now because you can't actually like hide some of these elements. A lot of this is like mouse and keyboard settings. Like some of these hotbars down here look really cluttered, but the only main one is this single cross hotbar. I like to have my job gauge down here on the bottom right. You do have the ability to use the simple mode job gauge, but personally I just really like how all the job gauges look. This is just a personal preference thing. I think it's also easier when you're swapping between all the different jobs, the way that I do, to have them more visually distinct. The simple job gauges are fine if you really want to cut down on visual clutter. It's literally just a bar with like icons that fill, basically just dots that show up, as opposed to the full design of the job gauge. I just like this. It makes it much easier to swap between jobs, in my opinion, having the full gauge. So yeah, I don't know. The other thing to note is the sizing on all of these different elements, because I'm on a 1440p monitor, 34-inch ultra wide, and If you're on a 1080p monitor, the resolution scaling might be slightly different. So I have my HUD set at standard 110% size. Again, playing at 1440, so this might be different for you. Just play with it. Play with the sizing, see what's comfortable for you. But that's what I have mine at. Everything is standard 110%, and then some things I make slightly bigger. But that's the starting point for me. So I guess the most important thing to talk about next, outside of the crossbar, we already went over HP and experience bars. Those are not super important. Would be, I guess, the enemy HP and buffs, debuffs, and all of that sort of stuff. So let me actually close out of this real quick. We have the striking dummies here. I'm just going to go around and hit all of these very quick. Just so that they are aggroed. So you'll see my enemy list popped up here. This is where, you know, all of the enemies when you're in combat will show up. And they also have cast bars next to them. So this is an important thing to have, because obviously when you are targeted on one single enemy, their HP and health bar and casts will show up. But you won't see the cast bars from everything else, but they do show up here in the enemy list. So if, you know, that striking dummy all the way down the end was casting something on me, I would be able to see it being cast here. This is super useful in dungeons or any encounter with multiple enemies. In Ultimate, there's a ton of casts that come from different enemies, like outside the arena and stuff, that you really need to be aware of. So it is super important to have your enemy list in a good spot. I have mine kind of center of screen here. Here, we'll go back to the HUD so you can see. Whoops, didn't mean to close that out. We're kind of winging this, so bear with me. But again, enemy list is over here. It's out of the way. I still have my main field of view. You can ignore some of this stuff too, this like item help and action help. I believe those are just the pop-ups for like when you hover over things for either items in your inventory or hovering over your skills. Those will pop up. So yeah, now that we have the enemies actually showing up, again, enemy list is there, but enemy HP is up here at the top. I don't find this to be super important. However, there's one really important thing about this, and if you go into the settings, it's this toggle that is display target info independently. This basically breaks out a few things. So it separates the HP bar, which is the least important of everything here. So I kind of cram the HP bar up at the top. You don't really need to look at that very often unless, you know, you're fighting in Rage in Savage or something. Here, real quick, let me just turn my camera back on because we're not talking about anything down there. So yeah, the HP bar, not super important. I just put that all the way up at the top to get it out of the way. But this display target info independently also breaks out the debuffs and buffs on that enemy. So as you can see right now, the chocobo applied, it just went away, but when it does it again, yeah, there's a debuff that pops up. That is just like a bleed or something that the chocobo puts on the enemy. So again, if you have like a ninja or a scholar in your party, if the ninja mugs them, or if the scholar puts up chain strat, those will pop up there. And with this, I do have that element slightly enlarged. It is at 140%. So slightly bigger just so I can see those debuffs on the enemy clearly. Because that's the only spot they show up for me, is up there. And then the other thing that pops up is the target info progress bar. And I have that right front and center, basically over my character. So whenever an enemy is casting an ability, it shows up here. So whenever, you know, a new mechanic's coming up, it's front and center. I see it every single time. Otherwise, if you don't do this display target info independently, it'll be up here next to the HP bar, and it makes it really hard to see. So you want that enemy cast bar somewhere more so in your field of vision, and I also have it at 180%. So it's pretty huge compared to everything else. But this way I am very easily able to see whatever the boss is casting, whatever attack is coming up next. It's basically just popping up over my character. This one right underneath is my own progress bar, so if I'm playing caster, that's basically my cast bar. That shows up pretty much right underneath my character as well. You always want to have an eye on that if you're trying to like slide cast or whatever. So those two being pretty much directly in my field of view is super important to me. Now, if we get into, we'll close that out. The next thing I want to talk about is my own buffs and debuffs. I'm pretty sure these need to be split as well. Yeah. So if I have them displayed as a single element, it's up here in like a single bar of buffs. Like all the buffs and debuffs show up in a single line. It's super confusing. The way I found that works best is to split that into 3 groups. I believe those 3 groups are buffs, or for me it's debuffs, buffs, and then the status info other, I believe is the 3rd one. Let me just double check that. Yeah, status info other. So again, that's just like my FC buffs that show up in the top right corner. You can't really see it because it's kind of off screen, but they're there. You can see them. But the main 2 that we're looking at are just the general buffs and debuffs. So I have my debuffs directly next to my character here, so they show up nice and big. Those are at 160%, and then I have my buffs right underneath them, and those are at, what is it, 110? No, that's a different. Conditional enhancements, I guess. No, that doesn't sound right. It's this first one, sorry. There's actually 4 elements there. I have the one turned off because we're only splitting into 3 groups. So the enhancements are at 140, buffs 140, debuffs 160. Tracking my own buffs, you know, I could probably increase them both to 160 and that would be nice, but I don't know. This is just how I've always done it. I've made the debuffs a little bigger. It creates a little bit of separation, having them both different sizes. I know my buffs are slightly smaller and below, and the debuffs are nice and big. I'm not missing any, because in Savage and Ultimate, you need to read your debuffs really quickly. They also show up in the party list. As you can see, the Chocobo's getting some buffs up here in the party list right now. So all your party buffs and debuffs will show up here as well. But I like to have these 2 things like right next to my character, always in my field of view. So when I'm looking at the screen, like I can just look at what's happening right in the middle, and then I can look at the enemy list, I can look at my buffs, debuffs, I can look at what the enemy's casting, I can look at my hotbar very easily, and my gauges. So it just keeps my field of view in this range. Obviously, again, if I was healing more, I would want to be looking up at the party list more often, but I could bring that, you know, slightly in more. And then the other thing with the buffs and debuffs is this setting that lets you pretty much align them differently. I just have them on left justified 10 by 2, so it shows 2 rows of 10, I believe that's how that works. And they are left justified, so, you know, the first buff would show up here in the top left corner, and then they would go across 10 wide, and then start another row. You're never really going to see that many, but I find that having 2 rows works well enough. I don't know, I haven't really thought about these settings too much. The debuffs, I believe, are the same. Yeah, the buffs and debuffs are both set up like that, so I don't know. It's something you can play around with if you want them in a tighter group, 2 rows of 5 or something, or 4 rows of 5, but I don't know. You can play with that, see what works for you, but that's the setting that I've always had it on. So the next thing that we can talk about is the party list, because I believe there's some stuff in here as well. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. Party list. Clicked on the wrong thing. I don't actually know where this setting is, but there, I guess it's in the character config menus, but there's a setting that shows you more buffs on the party list. So I believe the standard setting is to only show 5 buffs or debuffs. There's a setting you can click on that expands that to 10. So like next to every party member's name, it will show 10 debuffs or buffs. I find that super useful. The more, you know, party buffers you have in your raid, you know, sometimes you want to see more than is typically available. Another thing, there's another setting. Sorry, I'm jumping all over the place here, but I'm just doing whatever comes to mind in this video. There's another setting that prioritizes your own buffs first, which is super useful because a lot of the time you'll get buffs from your party members, but you're trying to like track maybe a buff that you're trying to keep up or whatever. So it's good to have those first in line. I'll try to find where some of this stuff is, maybe when I'm editing, but yeah, it's super useful to have all of that so that your buffs show up first. Outside of that, it doesn't really matter where all the other parties' buffs are showing up, but same goes for debuffs. Again, debuffs are not really applied by the party, obviously, so that's less important, but yeah, that's just one thing to keep in mind. I forget where that setting is. I'll have to come back to that later, but what's next? We went over a lot of things already. Again, the party list, there's really not much to it. The limit gauge, I put that right above the party list. It's a clean look. I guess the next thing to talk about would be focus target, which, let me back out here. I have to resummon my chocobo because I've been talking too long. So one thing you can do, either on the boss or on a party member, is right click and focus target. Now this pops up a little bar. It also shows all of the buffs and debuffs that are applied. So here you can see some of the buffs and debuffs. You see my buffs popping up here like we just talked about. You see a debuff up top on the boss health bar because I just applied my dot. But with the focus target, you also get a copy down here. This is basically just another health bar. You'll see whatever they're casting down here as well. And this is really useful if you're a healer specifically. You can focus target the boss because on healer, you're swapping around to party members a lot. So if I'm focused on a party member healing them, the boss target goes away. I will not see what they're casting. You will not see their health bar. But if you have them focus targeted, you will always have that information on screen right here. Obviously, you can have this wherever you want. I have mine just over here to the right a bit. It's just a nice convenient spot. But you would see the cast bar here. If I focus target my chocobo, this can also be useful on healer if you want to focus target the tank. You can always watch their HP a little easier. You can see what mitigations they're using because buffs and debuffs will show up. As you saw, the cast bar was just there. I actually have them targeted, but if I have the enemy targeted here, and I'm attacking them, you would still see the enemy casts show up in the middle of your screen, how I have it set up. But then you would also see, you know, casts from your focus target over here as well. So there's a lot of ways you can use this. You can use it on different party members that you see fit. Sometimes it's good to focus target like a partner in a raid, like your partner that you have to go stack with or whatever, just so you can see where they are more clearly, because it does put this arrow over their head as well. So that can be useful for different stuff. On controller, a lot of the time I will just target them in the party list if I can do that real quick, if I need to see where somebody's at. But yeah, I don't know. The focus target's super useful for that. Again, if you're on healer, it can be really useful to focus target the boss just to make sure that you're always seeing the boss's casts on your focus target while you're healing other party members. All right, so I found a few of those settings that I briefly mentioned earlier that we glossed over. Things about the party list. We're going to go into character configuration, UI settings, and then you have the different tabs here. General, there's nothing too crazy here. A lot of this stuff you can look through, but you know, a lot of this is just toggling some certain things on and off. Same with the HUD menu. A lot of this can be done from the actual HUD layout. But there's some settings in here you might want to look through. There's nothing super important. The only thing of note in this menu is this box that I have unchecked here. It's called Display Only Detrimental Effects You Inflict. So essentially what this does, if I were to turn it on, is that it would only show my debuffs on the enemy, on their health bar. The way that we split it up, it would show it underneath their health bar. But if you turn this on, like, you'll only see your own stuff. And that's not good, because you want to see if your party members are applying their raid debuffs. Like, if the Scholar is applying Chain, you want to know when that's up so you can do your burst at the same time, ideally. Ideally, they're just doing it on cooldown, or, you know, the scheduled time that the fight timeline dictates. But, yeah, I don't know. I don't know why you wouldn't want to see when that's up. It's not going to save you much visual clutter. There may be, you know, 3 or 4 debuffs up on the boss at a time. Maybe 5 or 6. I don't know exactly. I guess all the different dots from the healers and other enemies as well. But it's really not that much. It's just good to see that stuff. It's good to see what your party's doing if they're putting their buffs up on time. So I would not turn that on. And then if we go into the party list, here's that other setting that I was talking about that shows how many status effects are displayed in the party list. By default, I believe this is at 5, but you can crank it all the way up to 10. You can put it wherever you want. If 10's too much, you can put it at like 8 or 7 or something. But I would recommend increasing this. I have mine at 10 so I can see all of the different buffs that are out at the same time. It's very rare that you'll overcap the 10. In some fights you do, like in top, you get a whole bunch of buffs and debuffs at the same time and it's a mess. But, you know, I have mine set to 10. That's where that is under UI settings party list. And then the other thing in this menu that's pretty cool that you can do is go to this roll sort option. So this sorts your party list in whatever order that you wish jobs to show up in. So tanks and healers are kind of whatever. I usually have them set up where the more likely main tanks are at the top, off tanks are at the bottom. You know, this is my order: Warrior, Paladin, Dark Knight, Gunbreaker. It doesn't really matter. Same thing with the healers, regen and then shield. But the DPS is where it's important for me, because I play Dragoon a lot and have Dragon Sight, and I manually give this out to my party members. So I like the most likely Dragon Sight partners to be at the bottom of the party list, because then I can just press up on the D-pad twice and I am targeting them. So I have Samurai, Ninja, Monk, Reaper, Dragoon, basically all the melees. Dragoon might not be. I don't know. This is kind of subjective, but I have all the melees. Then I have Black Mage because they're more likely to get Dragon Sight. And then I have Machinist, who's also more likely to get Dragon Sight. And Summoner, Red Mage, Dancer, Bard, Blue Mage, whatever. So this is the order that the DPS will show up in your party list. You can arrange it however you want. This is how I do it specifically for Dragoon. And it's now just what I'm used to. Obviously, I still show up at the top of the party list, but the 3 other DPS will be ordered as shown here. It's kind of neat. Something that you can play with in that menu. And then the other one thing that I skimmed over before with buffs and debuffs that I was apparently just blind, it's right here. When you go to your status info menu here in the HUD layout, you are able to prioritize your own enhancements right here for buffs and not for debuffs because, yeah, it's, you know, you would never need to do that. But for... Am I reading this right? Am I going insane? Maybe I just said that wrong, but yeah, enfeeblements, you cannot do that, correct. And then enhancements, I don't know, I'm going crazy. Either way, this menu is confusing with a lot of the same wording, but I have prioritize own enhancements turned on. Yeah, this is under enhancements. I'm just going insane, apparently. Okay, so for your buffs, I would turn that on. I think by default, it puts them in maybe the order that they were applied in. I'm not entirely sure, but I turn on prioritize my own so that mine are at the very front of the list here on this left-hand buff window. It's actually this bottom one. So just so I can see that mine are at the front of the line, I don't have to go search through all of the party's buffs to see if mine are falling off or whatever, because they do have little timers underneath them so you can see when they're going to fall off or whatever. So it's good to just be able to see yours first and foremost. And I'm pretty sure that wraps it up. There's really not a whole lot to the HUD. Again, mine is in ultra wide here. You can see the full layout. There's some stuff on the sides. It's really personal preference. A lot of this stuff, again, the sizing and everything might depend more on your monitor and your resolution settings, but this is what works for me. This has been very comfortable in rating. Some of this stuff might obstruct my field of view a little bit, but overall, like, I can see my character at the center of everything very clearly. I can see if I'm standing in things, if I'm, you know, soaking a tower, if I'm out of an AoE, if I'm in a safe spot, whatever it is, there's nothing really in my way. If I zoom out here, get that off screen, you can see I'm fully zoomed out here. And I am kind of in this nice clear zone right here, where the only thing that pops up and obstructs me is maybe a cast bar, but that's not so bulky that I can't see where I'm standing. Again, if you find that that gets in your way, you can move it up or down wherever you see fit. Same with your cast bar. That might not need to be so front and center. Maybe you could have it like over here or something, or down by your HP maybe. I don't know. It's worked for me right here. It's nice to see so I don't interrupt my casts, so I can slide cast well. But yeah, a lot of people have been asking for this video, so hopefully this was helpful. We'll pretty much just leave it at that. If you have more questions, let me know in the comments. But yeah, my HUD is pretty straightforward. It's as clean as can be. I have all the icons as small as they can possibly be, where I can still see them comfortably, just to really open up a lot of that screen real estate. And yeah, make it look clean for you guys as well. So hopefully this helped. If you liked this video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe. And yeah, we should have more videos coming this week. So thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Have a good one. Peace.